agreed to do the area. All I felt was the last part of it, so we made the vote. You can't start it at the beginning of the meeting, do not record it. So it was at the end of the meeting, and then it started recording. Yeah, because I just have to sit there, I can't do nothing with it.
Montana's pretty good.
Coming off.
I'm just jealous of whatever time it is.
I think next week it's coming.
Get too hot, please don't.
It's too hot, man.
That's what your wife says. That's what your wife says.
It doesn't actually bother me, but it's just hot if I'm outside.
You need a raccoon trap.
Yes.
Yeah.
Waiting for 8:30. You got 8:30?
I do.
Okay, everyone, thank you for coming. It's 8:30. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we're going to go right into a non-public. Make a motion to go into non-public for session 1 on the RSA 91A32C. Do I have a second? Second. Roll call, Brian?
Yes.
Kyle? Yes. And Smith is yes.
8:30,
I'll be back.
May 16th.
All I can do is this one. I think we're all right.
This is different.
So the yellow, my truck is one.
Comeau leaves. Yeah. Just the oak? Just the oak. It is. Kerosene. Whatever that is.
Does that heater up there?
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, I didn't show that in the drop below.
That's wondering what that thing was. This is your mic.
Mic is hot, so. That'd be great.
Be careful what I say. No, I don't. Now that I'm, approaching my late 40s, you're doing great. You're awesome.
What I collect is an agenda item because I don't want that specific thing.
Yeah.
Then go in and pull that all into the AI intelligence and it creates a very detailed
And does it know who everybody is?
Everybody here? Just wait for the town administrator to come back. Just waiting on you.
More being made.
Okay. I make a motion to re-enter the public meeting. All those in favor? Aye. Not so in minutes.
9 o'clock.
I am going to recess the Selectmen's meeting, and I am going to open the hearing into the recommendation for termination of Officer Blackwood on the RSA 4148. I just want to be clear, this is not a public hearing, meaning there is no general public input. This is a hearing open to the public as requested by Officer Blackwood. The board will not be taking any questions. There will be no cross-examination between parties. This is my meeting, and I control it, and I want to be clear on that. I'm going to read the format as presented that was in the letter. This was given to Officer Blackwood. It states, this is a show cause format. You will be provided with the opportunity to present any relevant evidence in opposition to the police chief's allegations and/or recommendations. The police chief shall then be permitted with the opportunity to submit a rebuttal, which may include evidence and/or testimony, in response to the police officer's evidence and/or position on this matter. The police officer shall then be given the chance to address any issues, evidence that the police chief provided in rebuttal. The police officer will be limited to respond to only the matters raised by the police chief in rebuttal. I also want to give credit, Government Oversight, the Honorable Ed Comeau, who videotapes this. He does not get paid by the town. He does this through donations and donations only. And I believe the board thoroughly embraces the camera because it sheds the light of truth on what we do. Okay, I'm going to introduce, I am the chairman, Jonathan Smith. This is Kyle Copeland, Selectman, and that's Selectman Brian Keys. Please just introduce yourself to the right, and then we'll go over to the left.
Chief Donald Babin.
Pedro Spears from Drummond-Woodson, I represent the town.
Officer Carrie Blackwood.
Attorney Mark Bodwin, representing Officer Carrie Blackwood.
How did you spell your last name?
Bodwin, B-E-A-U-D-O-I-N.
Okay, we're going to move into the first part of the hearing, which is Officer Blackwood's attorney's opportunity and Officer Blackwood to be heard.
Thank you. Do you mind if I approach? I have some documents to
Sure.
show the board. Thank you. As you'll see, we have a written argument, which is the first several pages, so that the board can review back to it in its own time, so that they have all the information that they need. The other documents attached are the supporting documents that are referenced in the written argument. And I'd just like to ask briefly, Mr. Chairman, how you'd like me to proceed. I can make an argument, or I can have Officer Blackwood kind of speak to what occurred and then make a short argument afterwards. I'm not sure if you'd like to hear directly from ourselves or...
That is your option.
Sure.
However you want to state your case, but I just want to be clear, there will be no cross-examination, and this board will not be taking questions.
Very good, thank you. Do you want to swear in the witness, or do you want me to swear in the witness under oath?
It's not necessary.
Okay, thank you. All right, Ms. Blackwood, why don't you introduce yourself to the board?
Hi, I'm Officer Carrie Blackwood. I've been in your employment at the town for 4 years.
All right, I'd like to bring you back now to November 30th of 2024 at around 7:30 in the morning. Were you working that day?
I was.
And in what capacity were you working?
I was the assigned duty officer for the Ossipee Police Department.
Were you in a fully marked cruiser in uniform?
I was.
Okay. And did anything catch your attention that morning?
Yes. While I was doing traffic enforcement along the Route 16 corridor, the radio announced a broadcast for a stop and arrest bolo that was issued out of the town of Farmington. It was addressed to Carroll County because the suspect in that bolo lived in Carroll County in East Wakefield.
And what did you do when you heard that?
I recognized the subject's name that came over the bolo. I am familiar with him, and I initiated contact with the Stratford County Dispatch Center, offering my assistance to attempt to help take that subject into custody.
And did they reach out to the Farmington officer?
They did.
And what did she say about your offer of assistance?
She enthusiastically accepted it. I believe her direct quote was something along the lines of, "Yes, please have Officer Blackwood do anything she can do to take him into custody."
And at some point, did you contact your supervisor and advise your supervisor of what was going on?
I did. After I had made contact with the suspect by phone, I had called him with my personal cell phone, knowing that my name would show up on the caller ID and he'd be more inclined to answer it. And with my department-issued cell phone, I recorded that conversation and advised the suspect that he was being audio recorded and that it was not a personal call. After speaking with him for a period of about 40 minutes, while relaying the information he was giving to me to the Carroll County Dispatch Center through the mobile data terminal, the laptop and the cruiser, I was able to ascertain his location and that he had had a head injury, that he was highly emotional and suicidal. He had made several suicidal statements to me, and I was able to negotiate that while he would not turn himself into law enforcement directly, that he would surrender himself at Frisbee Memorial Hospital in Rochester for both medical care for his head wound and his mental health issues that he was actively battling. Once that arrangement had been made, I contacted my direct supervisor, who is Sergeant Joe Oswald, and asked his permission if I could go to Frisbee, as the subject had made it very clear that he trusted me and that he was willing to turn himself in to me, but wasn't inclined to want to deal with other law enforcement. Sergeant Oswald, after explaining the circumstances to him, gave me permission to continue to Frisbee Memorial Hospital to make contact with the subject there.
And on your way to the hospital, did you contact dispatch and ask them to do anything?
I did. I contacted first Carroll County Dispatch and advised them that I was leaving the county and the circumstances for it, which, because of the mobile data transmission instant message feature, they were mostly aware of, but I brought them up to speed. And then I contacted Stratford County Dispatch because that's their jurisdiction. I explained to them that he was willing to turn himself in at Frisbee for medical care. And I asked them to have a Rochester unit, given that Frisbee Memorial Hospital is in Rochester, intercept him in the parking lot so that it would minimize any possibility of bad fallout inside the hospital while he was being taken into custody.
And did Rochester take him into custody?
Rochester did not take him into custody.
Who did?
New Hampshire State Police was started because it's my understanding that Rochester was unavailable, which isn't uncommon. They're a very busy agency, so New Hampshire State Police was started at the location, and they took him into custody in the parking lot.
Was he on the phone with you at the time?
He was. He was a passenger in his mother's vehicle at the time, and so when she pulled into the parking lot, they knew what vehicle to look for because I had ascertained that information prior on the phone, and they immediately circled his vehicle, took him out of the car at what we would call a felony stop. Essentially at gunpoint, removed him from the vehicle, and took him into custody without incident. When the state police began to approach his vehicle, he immediately called me. Was obviously upset, feeling that he had been set up, but I was able to talk him through being calm and surrendering to arrest to prevent any further issues for himself.
And did you show up shortly thereafter?
I did.
I mean, we just talking a few minutes, or how long were we talking?
Yes, when he called me, I was getting off of Route 16 in Rochester. I was only minutes from the hospital at that point.
Okay, so you continued to the hospital?
I did.
And did you meet with the state police?
I did.
And what did you do next?
When I met with state police, they had the suspect in custody, handcuffed. He was seated in the very busy waiting room of the emergency department. He was clearly very agitated. They had him handcuffed behind. He didn't fit in the chair. People were staring at him, which was making him more agitated. I inquired with state police if they had any of their own charges for the suspect. And they stated that they did not, that he had been cooperative with them, though unhappy. And so I offered them the option of either staying or releasing him to me, as I had to do what we call involuntary emergency admission paperwork, IEA paperwork, because he had expressed suicidal statements to me. I needed to be at the hospital anyway. So I offered, rather than having 5 uniformed officers standing in a public emergency department making the public uncomfortable and the suspect uncomfortable, that they release him to me and they could clear the scene. They took that option.
So you took custody of him at that point?
I did.
Okay. And at this time, were you, through this time frame, were you in contact with Farmington PD?
I had been in contact with Farmington PD both through Stratford County Dispatch, when I had advised them that I was headed to Frisbee and asked for state police or Rochester to respond. And at some point through this, Officer Morton from the Farmington Police Department contacted me by phone.
And you told them what was going on?
I brought him up to speed as to where we were at. He expressed to me that, he wasn't terribly familiar with what was going on, as he wasn't the officer that had responded the night before. The incident occurred right before their shift change, so the midnight officer had handled the incident that issued the stop and arrest bolo. And Officer Morton was the daytime officer that really wasn't familiar with the facts of the case, which he admitted. So after bringing him up to speed, I continued to the hospital.
And did he eventually show up at the hospital?
He did.
How much longer after you were there?
Oh, probably at least 25 minutes.
Okay. And did you talk to him at the hospital?
I did.
Okay, and you brought him up to speed at the hospital?
I
so
did.
Everything was going on. When you were at the hospital, did you attempt to interview the suspect at all?
Beyond ascertaining his injuries for the medical staff, no.
Okay, so you weren't asking him any incriminating questions?
No.
Okay, did you read him his Miranda rights?
No.
Okay, why didn't you read him his Miranda rights?
I wasn't investigating the domestic violence incident. It didn't occur in our community. I had no reason to investigate that. I had him in custody for the involuntary emergency admission and to get him medical care for the visible head wound that he had.
All right, so did he make any statements to you though?
He did.
But those weren't solicited statements?
They were not.
Okay, did you put those in your report?
I did.
Okay. At any point, did any of the Farmington officers tell you not to respond to the hospital?
No.
Did any of the Farmington officers tell you not to assist them with the IEA paperwork or his medical review at the hospital?
No. In fact, when the Farmington officer arrived on scene, I offered to hand him the IEA paperwork to have him fill out. I was willing to explain what the suicidal statements were, and he in fact declined that paperwork, handed it back to me, and asked me to fill it out.
So at any point, did the Farmington Police Department ever ask you to leave the hospital?
They did not.
Okay. Did you ever paint the Farmington Police Department as the bad guys to the suspect?
No. I played up the knowledge that I had of the suspect while on the phone with him, saying things like, "No one's going to be more fair to you than I am," which is a reasonable statement that we use often in negotiation. But no, I never painted them as the bad guys.
Did you offer the suspect any promises or anything of that nature? Any, to help him get out of trouble at all?
No, I said I would help him any way I could. The options for which I could help him are very limited in those scenarios.
Did you try to hinder his apprehension for the Farmington PD at all?
No.
Okay. And do you know Captain Favorite at the Farmington Police Department?
I do?
Is he the one who filed the complaint?
Yes.
And how do you know him?
I've known Captain Favorite since we were in high school. His wife and I actually went to elementary school together, and I worked for Captain Favorite when he was a sergeant at the Milton Police Department.
Okay. Were you guys friendly?
We were professional.
Okay. All right. We'll leave it at that. And at this time, I'm going to move on to the second allegation, but I don't know if the board has any questions that they might want to ask.
The board have a question?
No, sir.
Okay, thank you. All right, so the next allegation has to do with the evidence room security. Besides being a patrol officer with the department, do you have any other responsibilities?
Yes, I have filled in periodically, assisting with prosecution when our attorney hasn't been available, and I also handle the day-to-day management of the evidence room, which includes evidence and seized property.
Okay. So I'd like to bring you back now to December of last year. What were you doing in the evidence room?
I was prepping our evidence room. As the board knows, we moved into the new police department in January, and in December there was a lot of prep to package the evidence room in a manner that it could be moved from one building to another.
Okay. And when you were doing that, did you do anything that caused the department to have attention on you?
I did. While I was boxing up evidence, I can't remember which day in the series it was, but I had taken a picture of a stack of file boxes, probably 3 or 4 boxes high, and behind it was the evidence room was visible. There were some firearms in the background that are blurry and kind of out of focus, and posted it to Snapchat. I can't remember what the caption was, but it was something along the lines of, you know, pray for my back or pray for my sanity as I package up all this stuff today.
Was there any identifiable information in the picture?
No.
With the reference to the firearms, could you even make out the make and models and serial numbers on the firearms?
No, you could see that they were long guns in the background, but there was nothing more identifiable on them than that.
And I would just bring the board's attention to page 88 of your packet. That's the actual photo taken and posted, just for your reference. Did anybody ever speak to you about that?
Yes.
And can you just tell the board about the conversation that you had with that person and who it was?
Sure. I had a brief conversation with Sergeant Oswald, again, my direct supervisor, where he asked about the photo. I told him that yes, I had posted it, and he said that the chief was displeased with that and that I shouldn't do that again. I explained to him that I would not do it again, and I have not done it again since.
All right. And your understanding, was that verbal counseling?
Yes.
Okay. Does the board have any questions about this allegation at all?
The board have any questions? No, proceed.
Okay, we're going to move on to allegation number 3, which is a Facebook engagement on an official account. Now, I'm going to bring you back to December 31st of 2024, and shortly thereafter. Can you tell the board about a posting that you made for the department on Facebook?
Sure. So December 31st, as we all know, is New Year's Eve. Under the chief's direction, the Ossipee Police Department hosted what's known as a saturation patrol for traffic enforcement. New Year's Eve is a known high alcohol consumption holiday that often, unfortunately, accompanies driving, and it was the chief's goal to minimize any drunk driving related issues in town. So all officers were brought in that day, whether it was their day off or not, and we all worked extra detail, specifically to pull over cars. It was traffic enforcement along all of our public roadways, and all told, we worked out till just after midnight that night. The following day, I made a Facebook post about the saturation patrol, because I'm sure it looked a little odd to have that many blue lights flashing in town. And that post received an outpouring of response.
Now, were you directed to put that post on the department's Facebook account?
I was not given post-by-post orders from the chief as to what to post to the Facebook page. If there was to be a press release, those were always cleared by the chief, but as far as community involvement and those sorts of things, he left that to my discretion.
Okay. And what happened when a number of these comments came in on the post?
Sure. I was on my days off. A number of comments did come in, some of which I was able to respond to, some of which I didn't. Due to complications with Facebook, I could not access and post from my work department cell phone as the Ossipee Police Department. The police department's Facebook page was associated with a private Facebook account from the original administrator that made it, which is former Detective Sergeant Mask. And then after that, it was handed off to Officer Llewellyn. I was unable to get permissions to access it without being Officer Llewellyn. I am clearly not Officer Llewellyn, and it is linked to her personal Facebook page. So when I was logged into her account in order to use the Facebook page on my desktop, without a specific application, which was accessible from my desktop but not from my work phone, it would have posted as though I were her. So to avoid any attempts at fraud or to upset Officer Llewellyn, who was no longer affiliated with our agency, I was responding to a lot of these messages from my personal account because I didn't have another option. The overwhelming majority of the comments on the post were supportive. There were a few that were less than supportive, and there were some that were inaccurate. I used it as an opportunity to educate the public on why we do traffic stops and what the difference is between reasonable suspicion and probable cause, because the day-to-day citizen doesn't necessarily know the nuances of what we do. There were a handful of posts that got out of hand, that turned into personal attacks on me and my character, and it was at that point that I turned off the commenting option on the post.
Now, when you turned off the commenting option on the post, did you ban anybody or just turn the comment option off?
No, from my cell phone, the work cell phone, the authorized user function doesn't have enough permissions to be able to ban anybody. It's not a full administrator. So I couldn't have physically banned anyone even if I had wanted to.
Okay, so when you said you turned off the comments, you only turned off the comments to that post?
Yes,
So people could still access the page?
yes,
And people still could make comments on other posts?
yes,
Okay. And a complaint came in at some point?
yes,
And did anybody speak to you about that complaint?
yes.
And can you tell the board about your encounter there?
While I never got to hear or see any official complaint, I was contacted off duty by Sergeant Oswald, asking me to unblock the complainant in this complaint. I explained to him that I didn't block him and therefore I couldn't unblock him. That wasn't an option. I explained that I had turned off comments for the specific post and why I had done that. He then stated that the chief of police wanted the login information for the department's Facebook page, which had been an ongoing point of contention since the departure of Detective Sergeant Mask. I explained to him that I didn't feel comfortable giving the login information as it wasn't mine. It was linked to Officer Llewellyn's personal Facebook, and she had made very clear that she didn't want just anybody roaming around in her social media. I explained that the account was already logged in on my desktop computer at the police department, and that he was welcome to access it there. I gave him the PIN to get onto my computer. I wasn't trying to hide anything. I was just trying to protect Officer Llewellyn's privacy, as well as the agreement that we had with her, because it was out of the goodness of her heart that we were even able to access the Facebook page at this point. Unfortunately, something either got lost in translation or was ignored, and the login information was taken from my desk, and the chief logged in on his computer, which notified Officer Llewellyn that a new computer was trying to access her Facebook account, and she immediately changed all of her passwords and settings and ultimately locked all of us out of the Facebook page indefinitely.
Okay. And as a result of that conversation, what was your understanding of, did you feel like you were disciplined? Did you feel like it was just a conversation?
No.
How did you feel that conversation ended?
Frustrations were expressed about the dysfunction of the Facebook page, which I shared. And I explained that at this point I had done all I could. I wasn't going to work on the Facebook page anymore. Sergeant Oswald expressed that that was fine. The chief would take it over. And I pointed out that this was why I had said it would have been easier to make a new page, which no one had wanted to do in the handoffs that had happened to the page prior. Rather than have it linked to someone's personal account, I said we should just scrap it and make a new one linked to a police department specific account, not a personal officer.
Okay. Does the board have any questions on this allegation at all?
Board have any questions? No, you can proceed.
Okay, we're gonna move on to allegation number 4, failure to secure evidence.
Sure.
I want to bring you back now to February 14th of this year. Can you explain to the board what happened on that day?
Sure. February 14th, I had taken a small amount of marijuana from a traffic stop. It was a violation level amount of marijuana, which means it was less than 3/4 of an ounce. And I had secured it in an evidence bag with the intention for it to be destroyed. It wasn't anything that we were going to charge, and it was set aside for destruction.
Before you move on,
Sure.
can you just describe to the board what a law enforcement evidence bag is and how that works?
Sure. So when I took the marijuana off the suspect, it was already in a small cellophane bag. It was round and tied with a knot. We then take that and we put it in a thicker, clear plastic bag that has a tamper evidence seal on it. We do that so we can see the contents, and we put a label on the front and it gets stored so we know what it is. The tamper evidence seal will show you if anybody has tried to gain entry into the bag in any way. It's red and it's very obvious if somebody has attempted to access it after it's been sealed.
Okay, so it was sealed in an evidence bag.
It was.
Okay, continue.
I had the item on my desk. I was doing a few other things, got called to something. Ultimately, that small bag of evidence of marijuana, it wasn't even evidence, it was seized property, got covered by something else on my desk, and in the day-to-day functions of being a police officer, I forgot about it. I had a human error, and I forgot that it was there. I went about my day, and didn't give it another thought.
At some point, did you realize that it was no longer on your desk?
Yes.
And what did you do then?
I contacted, again, Sergeant Oswald and said, I have made a terrible mistake. There was a item on my desk of marijuana that is no longer there, and that's obviously concerning.
And what was his response?
Sergeant Oswald said that he knew where it was and that it was in the chief's possession, and that if I wanted it back, I had to speak with the chief of police.
And did you eventually speak with the chief?
I did.
And what happened next?
It was about a week after I had spoken to Sergeant Oswald. We only have enough coverage to have, for the most part, one officer on at a time, and it was several days before I overlapped with the chief again. When I finally did overlap with the chief, I approached him and I said, hey, I hear you have something that belongs to me that I need to take care of. And he made a comment, something along the lines of, well, I was wondering how long it was going to take for you to realize it was gone. And he gave it back to me. He took it out of a safe in his office and gave it back to me.
And then what did you do with it from there?
I secured it for destruction.
Okay. And were you disciplined at that time?
No.
Were you interviewed about it at that time?
No?
All right. And so as far as you knew, everything was all set?
Yes.
Okay. Does the board have any questions for this allegation?
Any questions from the board?
No, sir.
All right, thank you. I'm going to go on to the next allegation, which is again another failure to secure evidence. This time I'm bringing you forward a little bit into March of 2025, March 8th specifically. Can you tell me what happened maybe the day before and then that day as to what this allegation is about?
Sure. So on that date, very late in my shift, I would say around 11 p.m., my shift normally ends at midnight, I was called to respond to a domestic disturbance in West Ossipee. It was a domestic disturbance between a father and his adult son, and the altercation was over the son's ongoing battle with drug addiction. On scene, there were no charges to be filed. It wasn't a physical altercation, but the father did surrender to me a small amount of powdery substance believed to be either heroin or fentanyl that he had taken from his son. Where no charges were going to be filed, that was also secured, taken back to the police department, and packaged for destruction. As I was packaging it, I got another call. It came in as a not conscious, not breathing subject. So I ran out of the building, as we tend to do for emergent calls. That call ran longer than I thought it was going to, and I ended up going straight from that call home to secure for the evening. And I was the only person working in the building. The police department was locked and secured behind me. The chief that following morning came into the police department to collect something from his office and observed that there was this container of drugs on my desk, again unsecured, and he spoke to Corporal French about it, who in turn secured it in a locker.
Now, when you say it was on your desk, was it also sealed in an evidence bag?
It was a round Tupperware container with a blue lid that was closed tightly, and then that blue lidded container was inside, again, a tamper-evident evidence bag.
Okay. And again, did anybody ever speak to you about that?
Corporal French spoke to me when I came on duty that afternoon at 2 in the afternoon. Corporal French mentioned that the chief had seen the drugs and that he had secured them and that the chief was unhappy.
Okay. Did the chief ever speak to you about that at that time?
No,
Did your supervisor ever speak to you at that time?
no,
All right. And so as far as you know, there was no discipline coming?
as far as I knew, yes.
Okay. Any questions on this last allegation?
Anything from the board? You can proceed.
Okay, thank you. So just a few more questions of her, and then I'll move into an argument. Were you ever formally interviewed for any one of these separate allegations?
No,
Okay. Did you ultimately meet with the chief on April 9th in the presence of Lieutenant Ripley and Sergeant Oswald?
I did.
And can you tell us what happened at that meeting?
Sure. I was already obligated to something else. I was at the county attorney's office doing testimony prep for a serious hearing we had coming up, and I was told that I needed to respond to the PD instead. I had to cut testimony prep short and respond to the police department, where I walked into a meeting I was unaware was going to occur between the chief, the lieutenant, and the sergeant and myself.
And at any point, did they read you your Garrity rights?
No,
Okay. Did they ever offer you to have a representative with you under Weingarten?
no.
Did they audio record this interview?
To my knowledge, no.
Okay. And so what was discussed at this meeting?
All of the allegations that you've mentioned in this hearing and a few other small housekeeping items that the chief felt needed to be addressed.
Okay. Did they tell you that they were doing an internal investigation on you for this?
No.
All right. Did they tell you that they were going to discipline you at the end of this meeting?
No, I was told by the chief that this wasn't an internal and that this was an opportunity for me to give my side of the story.
Okay. At some point, you were given a document. You were placed on administrative leave.
Yes,
Can you tell the board when that was?
sure. I was called off duty around 9 in the morning. That was on April 29th. I was already scheduled to come in for work at 2 in the afternoon, but at 9 in the morning, I got a phone call from Sergeant Oswald. And he explained that I was being asked to gather up before I left my house any and all property belonging to the Ossipee Police Department and to come in prepared to surrender my badge, credentials, firearm, all property, and that I was going to be placed immediately on administrative leave.
Okay. And at that point, did they provide you with any documentation?
While I was on the phone with Sergeant Oswald, I asked to have the chief prepare for me any documentation that he was using to support his allegations against me, and to have them ready when I surrendered all of my belongings at the police department.
I'm just going to have you look at this here and just go to where it's number 1 at the bottom.
Sure.
And was number 1 to 30 what you received that day?
Yes,
Okay, and that's all you received that day?
correct.
Okay. How about, let's turn to page 85. Did you receive that document that day?
I do not believe so, no.
When was the first time you saw that document?
When you forwarded it to me this week.
Okay. And that's 85 to 87. And is it dated or signed by anybody?
No, it talks about dates in the narrative, but I don't see that the document itself is dated.
Okay. How about page 89? Have you ever seen that document prior to when I sent it to you?
No,
Is that one dated at all?
no.
Okay. And how about pages 94 to 99? Did you ever see any of those documents?
No,
And not until I sent them to you?
correct.
Okay, so you knew nothing, you didn't even know those documents existed
No.
until preparing for this hearing?
Correct.
Okay. So at this point, I'm just going to provide you with some argument as to why Officer Blackwood should not be terminated, and that'll conclude my our presentation anyway. So, in 2020, law enforcement went through some changes. Specifically, as we all know, there were a string of events, including the George Floyd incident that occurred, that brought national attention to law enforcement. As a result, many in society felt that law enforcement should maybe change the way that they address with certain individuals, especially those that have mental health issues. As a result, New Hampshire changed some of its statutes. It also provided more critical incident training that it required of the officers. There was some more mandated training that was required at the academy as such. Officer Blackwood did receive critical incident training that this department did send her to. That was part of that change. That day, back in November of 2024, she was being proactive when she reacted to a bolo. Be on the lookout. She could have ignored it, she could have chose not to do anything, but since she knew the individual, she felt that she could help the Farmington Police Department safely take this person into custody without injury to either himself, his 10-year-old autistic nonverbal son, which was initially with him at the beginning of the call, and to any law enforcement officers or general public, and which is why she offered the assistance. If you were to listen to the radio traffic on dispatch, the Farmington police officer, and Officer Danielle Morin, responded very enthusiastically to Officer Blackwood's offer of assistance. She said whatever she could do, that would be great. So as you heard, Officer Blackwood made a call. He answered. She had a lengthy conversation with him. She recorded it as part of evidence, but she also informed him he was being recorded. And she was able to have this conversation with him. Although she tried to get him to turn himself in, he was reluctant to do that. He was, however, making several statements about either harming himself. I think he alluded to possibly suicide by police officer. So Officer Blackwood tried to switch gears to see if she could somehow find his location, pin him down, and safely take him into custody. Which is why she said, why don't you have your head checked out at the hospital? And I can meet you there and we can do that together. He eventually agreed to that. He did initially drop off his son, so his son was no longer part of the equation at that point. They were, he was with his mother. They were in her vehicle. He was going to the hospital. She was talking to him along the way. But she also realized that, okay, well, if he shows up at this hospital, we really don't want him inside the hospital where maybe he might create some type of disturbance. So it might be better if he were to be taken into custody outside the hospital in the parking lot, which is why she asked for Rochester Police Department to respond. They weren't available. State police obviously responded to the scene, and they surrounded the vehicle, at which point she was on the phone with the suspect and was able to have him calmly surrender himself to the state police and take custody of him. Now, part of the complaint from the Farmington Police Department was that she interfered with their investigation. At no point did she interfere with their investigation. Even if the Farmington officer were to arrest her on scene, whether at the hospital or at some other location, he has a physical injury on his head, a big welt on the back of his head. He gets struck in the head with a big candle. He is also making suicidal threats. The jail is not going to take him. The jail is going to say, bring him to the hospital, have him medically cleared, and then we will take him. So that step needed to happen regardless of who took him into custody. He had to go to a hospital to be medically cleared. Officer Blackwood was there at the hospital to assist with that. Now, she spoke with the state police. There was no need to have them hanging out at the emergency room, so she cleared them. She knew the Farmington officer was on his way, that he'd be there in a couple minutes. And she figured, I'll just sit here with him for a few minutes until the Farmington Police Department comes here. I'll help with whatever paperwork the hospital needs to assist the Farmington Police Department. And she made no attempt to interview him. He made several unsolicited comments. Now, she was also accused of not reading him his Miranda rights. Miranda rights come from Miranda v. Arizona, which is a U.S. Supreme Court case that was decided back in the 1960s. In order for you to have your Miranda rights, you need two prongs that need to be present. One, you need to be questioning the suspect, and two, the suspect has to be in custody. If you're missing one of those prongs, you're not required to read Miranda. She was not questioning him. He was in her custody, but she wasn't questioning him. She didn't have any criminal offenses to charge him with. She had no reason to question him. However, she did take and write the statements down that he was making, and she put them in a report to assist the Farmington Police Department with their prosecution down the road. When the Farmington officer arrived, she offered to interview him with him. And the Farmington officer said, no, I'm all set. And she said, okay. And he did hand the ID paperwork back and asked her to help continue with that. When she was done with that, and when she was done speaking with him and updating him, she left the hospital, or went to leave the hospital. While she was leaving the hospital, she ran into the suspect's mother in the parking lot, who had been sitting out there for about 30 minutes. So she stood out there and she talked with the mother for a few minutes, because the mother didn't know what was going on. She was obviously concerned and worried about her son. Officer Blackwood has sympathy for that. And so she went back into the hospital, met with Officer Morton a second time and said, hey, just to let you know, his mother's out in the parking lot in case you want to talk to her and let her know what's going to be going on. And then she left and returned back to town. At no time anywhere here did the Farmington Police Department tell her not to respond to the Frisbee Memorial Hospital, tell her not to do something, tell her to leave the hospital, or tell her not to be involved. There's no evidence of that anywhere other than Captain Favorite's complaint. If you listen to the audio recordings, it's an enthusiastic request for assistance. And as for mutual aid is covered under 105.13, that's a New Hampshire statute. And I included that in your packet. It's under appendix on page 82. Section 2 speaks to the authority given in that type of situation. And she was within that authority there. She was acting in good faith, trying to assist another police officer. The Supreme Court, the New Hampshire Supreme Court in State v. Smith, upheld that type of situation, and ironically that was a case that involved Ossipee Police Department, where two officers stopped a vehicle in Madison. They didn't have a mutual aid agreement with Madison, but he was driving so erratically they felt that he was a danger to the public, so they stopped him and they held him until state police arrived and arrested him for DUI. The Supreme Court ruled that because the officers acted in good faith and there were no other officers around to do that, that they weren't to suppress any evidence as a result. So when you look through these violations, violation 1 that the chief alleges is an oath of office. It doesn't specifically state in his allegation there what part of that policy she is alleged to have violated. I'm assuming, having read the policy and having read the facts, that he's referring to respecting an individual's constitutional rights. And I am assuming that's because he believed that Miranda was not given to the suspect. I'm also assuming that there was another section in there that talks about personal relationships interfering with decision making. Maybe because she knew the suspect, but he didn't gain anything from that. In fact, he was taken into custody as a result of that. So I'm not entirely sure what exactly the violation is there, but I would recommend that sustained finding by the chief be overturned to exonerated. And I'll talk about the different types of findings at the end. But violation 2, statutory authority. Again, doesn't specifically cite which part of the policy she violated. But I'm assuming it's because she took the custody of the suspect. And again, that doesn't violate RSA 105.13, Section 2. She was asked for assistance. She provided it. At no time was that assistance limited, nor was she ever asked to leave. Violation 3, in custody situations. Taking custody of a suspect and interviewing him without providing Miranda. As I said before, she didn't interview him. She didn't have a reason to read a Miranda. She wasn't required to. And, so that wasn't a violation. And just to kind of backtrack a little, she was never asked why she never read a Miranda rights. The chief never inquired with her because a proper internal investigation was never conducted in any of these allegations. Violation number 4, statutory authority. Again, he doesn't specifically state which part, but he says that because she didn't arrest the suspect for the domestic violence pursuant to the AG's manual and RSA 173B. He was taken into custody by the state police. He was in custody. There were no charges from Ossipee. She's not charged with domestic violence. She just took custody of him, which is what is required. And she did it. And she passed him off to the Farmington Police Department. So that one actually kind of really baffles me. I have no idea what he's talking about in that allegation. Violation number 5, mutual aid. She offered assistance. That assistance was accepted. She notified her supervisor that she was going to Frisbee Memorial Hospital and asked for his permission. It was granted. There was maybe some semantics about the term mutual aid. She was assisting another police officer with another department to try to bring somebody into custody in a safe manner that didn't cause anybody any harm. The last one was violation of number 5, conditions of work. And that's she interfered with another agency's arrest and remained on scene after being asked to leave. Again, like I said, she never interfered with the arrest. She was never asked to leave. She had custody of the suspect. He would have had to go to the hospital anyway. She actually assisted the Farmington Police Department. She allowed the state police to clear. The suspect was going to be more compliant in her custody. Again, she didn't interview him, and she turned him over to the Farmington PD when they arrived. Now, I included the department's internal affairs policy. That's at pages 73 to 81. And the potential outcome of IAs are listed on page 80. So if you look at page 80, there are several outcomes when you do an internal investigation. Because when a law enforcement agency does an internal investigation, it doesn't mean there's several possible outcomes. It doesn't mean it's always going to be sustained. So, it's on page 79, sorry. So number 1, it could be unfounded, which is the incident did not occur or the allegation is false and not factual. It could be exonerated, which is the incident occurred, but the officer's actions were justified, lawful, and in accordance with policies and procedures. Not sustained is facts presented are insufficient to clearly prove or disprove the allegation. Sustained, obviously, is that it occurred and sometimes is a policy failure. For that whole first incident and all those separate violations, I would recommend this board change those sustained findings to exonerated. Because she did everything in there, but she acted justified, lawfully, in accordance with policies, procedures, and state statutes. Nothing she did was out of the ordinary. If you were to ask any other police officer if it was unreasonable, they're probably going to say, no, I don't see a problem with this at all. She was helping to take this person into custody safely. Allegation 2. When you do an internal investigation, and when you look at that policy, and I'll point out some of the subsections here shortly, when you look at that policy, there are several things you have to do during an internal investigation. 1, you have to notify the employee that you are going to conduct an internal investigation. So usually what that consists of is a short letter that says it's alleged that you have done this. If you have done this, you may be in violation of this policy, and this policy. So it puts them on notice that the department's going to be looking into this. Second, an actual investigation needs to be conducted. That means interviewing witnesses, taking any evidence that might be that, available. Ultimately, interviewing the employee themselves. When you interview the employees themselves, you should be reading them their Garrity rights. Any department is going to be reading Garrity rights. Garrity rights protect the officer from any incriminating statements that she may say that could be used against her criminally. Now, the United States Supreme Court came up with Garrity because they understood the fact that departments needed to have compelled interviews, needed to mean you had to answer these questions, you don't have a choice. So they provided protections, which was Garrity. Garrity, and I've been involved in numerous internal investigations representing police officers all over the state. And every department that I sit down with reads you Garrity before they even begin the interview. The other thing that every department that I've interacted with, where I've sat in on these internal, well, number one, they allow me to sit in under Weingarten with the employee. And number two, it's recorded. They're always recorded. None of that occurred here. She was never notified of any internal investigations. She was never notified that she was being looked at for anything. She was never read her Garrity rights. She was never allowed a representative to be in the room with her. And nothing was ever recorded. And so there are several sections of that policy that the chief didn't even follow. The other thing that he didn't follow and then have you go back and take a look at page 80, progressive discipline. Progressive discipline was never used here. This was almost like a gotcha. I'm going to save up all these different allegations, and I'm going to put them all in one day, and I got you. I got enough now that I can terminate you. Instead of trying to correct the behavior as you moved along and trying to prevent this. And when you look at the narratives that are in here, nothing is signed. I'm assuming the chief wrote it because it says Office of the Chief of Police, but I don't know because his name's not at the bottom. He didn't sign it. There's no date on it, so I don't know when he drafted this. For all I know, he could have drafted this the day before he put her on administrative leave. I don't know. I know it at least it was at least drafted after April 9th, because April 9th is in a lot of those documents. So they weren't even drafted at the time that the incident occurred. So at this point, I think it's fundamentally unfair to terminate Officer Blackwood at this point because, again, another side note, she hasn't had a performance evaluation in over 2 years. So she hasn't had a performance evaluation. None of these incidents have been properly addressed with her. As far as she knew, everything was fine. She didn't receive proper due process, which is notification and a hearing. The only notification in the hearing was she got notified for this hearing and this hearing here before this board. There was no due process before that at all within the department. No Loudermill hearing, because usually there's a Loudermill hearing before it even comes to your level. That didn't occur either. She was, as you heard, she was the evidence custodian. There were 2 allegations that she left out evidence on her desk. She was never removed as the evidence custodian. In fact, she was allowed to remain working as a police officer for 2 months, almost a full 2 months after the last incident in March, without anything ever being done. And what I find surprising here too is the chief in his termination letter says any one of these alone is enough to terminate. Okay, well, if any one of these alone were enough to terminate, why did you allow her to work for 6 months as a police officer? If any department was going to feel like they were going to be terminating one of their police officers, they place that police officer on administrative leave, then they start the internal investigation. That's usually how this process works in other departments. But the chief didn't follow any of that. Under RSA 4148, it's a cause, but cause and just cause are interchangeable. Just cause is defined as a cause outside legal cause, which must be based on reasonable grounds, and there must be fair and honest cause or reason regulated by good faith. That's out of Black's Law Dictionary, the 6th edition. Under the appeal of Merrimack County, the New Hampshire Supreme Court identified 7 criteria that when it examines what just cause is. Those 7 criteria are, number 1, the reasonableness of the employer's position, the notice given to the employee, the timing of the investigation undertaken, the fairness of the investigation, the evidence against the employee, the possibility of discrimination, and the relation of the degree of discipline to the nature of the offense and the employee's past record. Again, if you go through any one of those, other than maybe number 6, which talks about discrimination, there's problems with all 7 of those. And so, as such, I will just say this, and I'm going to finish on this remark, is I've been involved in law enforcement internal investigations in one way or another since 2010, to include 9 years with the state police, and since 2019 with other departments around the state, including Manchester, Nashville, Londonderry, and a lot of other smaller towns as well, too. As a result of that, this is my recommendation as to what the board should do in this particular case. Allegation number 1, which is the Farmington incident, Officer Blackwood should be exonerated on all violations of that for the arguments that we have made here today. Allegation number 2, which is the posting of the Snapchat photo of the booking, the evidence room. I think she should receive a verbal counseling for that, which already occurred back in December of last year. Allegation number 3, which is the Facebook allegation. Again, I believe she should receive a verbal counseling for that, which was already received in January of this year. For allegation number 4, I would give her a written warning for that, because evidence is important and proper tracking of that is important. And for allegation number 5, because it was a second offense, I would probably recommend a 1-day suspension for that. But none of these, and even if you put them all together, equate to termination, especially the way the internal investigations were, or lack thereof, conducted. And I think that would be fair and to all parties involved in this, and I thank you for your time, and I'm willing to entertain any questions you might have.
Board have any questions before we move on?
No.
Thank you. Table's yours.
So I will start just as council addressing a few things on the head to potentially save the chief some time, and then I'm sure the chief will have some remarks. I want to start with the suggestion that some of the documents presented today by Officer Blackwood weren't provided to her at the time of her administrative leave. This is the due process hearing. So they've had the documents. We heard a lengthy, nearly hour-long presentation from Officer Blackwood and our counsel. Certainly, if Officer Blackwood believes she needs more time to prepare, I would ask them to raise that now. Perhaps we could pause the hearing and come back another day. It's our position they've had sufficient time to review the relevant documents and prepare for this hearing, which is the due process. This is the process that we're following. That raises another issue. There's a lot of talk about just cause, aggressive discipline, specific requests to exonerate Officer Blackwood, issue written warnings, and suspensions. That's not what this hearing is about. So this isn't an arbitration. Officer Blackwood is not a member of a union subject to a CBA. This is not a grievance process. This is the select board exercising its authority as the governing body of the employer to decide whether or not to terminate Officer Blackwood's employment. The chief doesn't have that power. So the chief, in his supervisory capacity as the head of the department, certainly, investigates complaints, makes recommendations to the board, and generally gathers facts. But he's not the one deciding whether or not to terminate. That's the decision for the board today. There's no requirement under RSA 4148 for the board to review in detail the specific internal findings, sustained or otherwise, of the chief, and overturn them or make a specific recommendation for each. All the board needs to determine today is whether or not it believes, as the governing body of the employer, that it wants to terminate Officer Blackwood, and believes that it has cause to terminate Officer Blackwood. That's it. And the standard is for cause. It's not just cause. Many of the cases cited by Officer Blackwood's counsel relate again to CBA's grievance processes that are more formal in nature. The Loudermill hearing, that's this hearing. This is the pre-termination hearing. It's occurring now as we speak. So with that sort of high-level overview, for the board has before it, I think, 80-something pages of documents. It has the written letter that summarized the chief's findings. It will now see in its packet that it has the investigation reports that underpin those recommendations, and certainly the board can take the time to review each of those, and the chief is here to discuss his findings. But it seems to me that fundamentally, much of this stuff isn't in dispute, really, and what we've heard today is more complaints about the chief's handling of the investigation and the chief's IA process than the actual incidents that occurred, and whether or not she's disputing them or whether or not some of the chief's findings are inaccurate. That's not, again, the issue before the board. Certainly the board can review the chief as his supervisor in terms of his operational control and investigation, but this isn't his hearing, right? He's not on trial here. I want to step through each of the major incidents that occurred that gave rise to the recommendation from the chief to terminate. We'll start with the Farmington incident, mutual aid. So there was a reference to the mutual aid statute suggesting that authorized misconduct. It didn't. So that statute simply stands for the proposition that a sworn law enforcement officer in New Hampshire essentially has statewide power, right? If you're an officer, you're an officer, and we're not going to draw arbitrary lines on the city limits or town limits when you exercise those powers. That's a fundamentally different issue than whether or not the department you work for authorizes you to exercise those powers outside the city limits. And that's fundamentally the issue the chief had with the response that day. And if you read through his investigation report, you read through Officer Blackwood's report, we're not talking about just a single moment in time. We're talking about a series of events. Frankly, it's the chief's position that Officer Blackwood never should have left the town. There was no reason to go there. Dispatch was aware of everything she was already aware of. It might have been a positive thing that she was speaking to the suspect, but to physically leave, to physically respond was unnecessary. But even if we assume that at some stage it was okay for Officer Blackwood to respond, the state police took custody. The state police had physical custody of the suspect. At that point in time, there's zero reason for an officer of this department to be responding. Why? We heard that the suggestion that the reason why was because Officer Blackwood needed to IEA him, involuntary emergency admission. And there's a suggestion, I believe, in the reports which are provided to the board that Officer Blackwood had intimate knowledge about the suicidal ideation. And that's true. The suspect on the phone call with her was making suicidal ideations. The problem is that was already known to everybody. That's in the dispatch logs. That was one of the first reports from the responding officers to the domestic violence scene, that suspect was unaccounted for, needed to be located, and had made threats of suicide. So the officers there already had enough to do an IEA. So no response was needed in terms of, like, I'm a witness, I need to provide my feedback. And then even if you assume that Officer Blackwood had some personal knowledge that should be shared with the officers, again, there's no need to take physical custody of that suspect. You just talk to the officers, talk to the state police, talk to Farmington when they get there, say, here's what I know. I want to help you out, here's what I know. Instead, Officer Blackwood took physical custody, brought him into the hospital. There was a lot of talk today about Miranda and whether or not Miranda was required to be written. Opposing counsel is correct. The general standard for Miranda is custodial interrogation. So you're in custody, you're not free to leave. I think we all concede he was not free to leave. So then the question becomes, are you interrogating the suspect? Officer Blackwood today admitted that she was asking about injuries. Now, she tried to characterize it, and I believe the counsel tried to characterize it as, oh, well, that's just the hospital side of things. That's not law enforcement. That's not a criminal investigation. I don't know how that can be true, because Officer Blackwood's counsel suggested, and I don't know where this fact comes from, that injury was from being, quote, struck by a candle. So it seems to me that the suspect was probably injured in that incident, and we have an officer of our department asking questions about injuries that relate to a pending domestic violence incident that's under investigation by another department, and receiving answers, taking notes. There may have been other voluntary sort of statements in that time, but the thing about Miranda is you got to read it before you start questioning. Once you start asking one question, you can't just rely on, well, all the other statements were voluntary. It cuts it off. So I would submit that even based on the report and the statements of Officer Blackwood today, essentially they've conceded, or would have to concede, that Miranda was violated. The other issue raised that kept on being repeated in the farming incident is this distinction between I was never told to not come. It's an interesting turn of phrase. I heard that repeatedly. I wasn't told to not come. I wasn't told not to respond. That's not really the issue here. We shouldn't have to rely on another third-party department saying, no, we don't need you to go away. The threshold issue should be, are you actually being asked? And it's interesting because there was some allusion to Officer Blackwood being asked, and I'm not sure if it was affirmatively stated today, yes, I was specifically asked. In Officer Blackwood's report, which is part of the packet, she wrote in her report that dispatch told her to continue on to the hospital. My understanding, and the chief can certainly confirm with you folks, is that the chief reviewed the dispatch audio and logs, and that there was no such request from dispatch that you could see. Maybe it wasn't recorded, maybe it somehow got lost in the letter, but it seems that when you review the documents that, while assistance might have been requested in the sense that you know this guy, can you get him to surrender? No one asked Officer Blackwood to leave Ossipee, drive all the way down to Rochester and physically respond. That's confirmed in the documents you have. Page 31 of the packet is the email from Officer Favorite, maybe Captain Favorite, from Farmington PD to the chief. In that, at the bottom of the page, he says at some point his response, and this was, to be clear, his response to a fellow Farmington officer talking about Officer Blackwood is sort of talking to this guy. His response was there was no reason for Officer Blackwood to be involved outside of a phone call. And I think, frankly, that's the chief's position. The chief doesn't necessarily fault Officer Blackwood, and he can speak for himself, for being willing to help out in some way. It's the extent, it's the leaving the jurisdiction. As Officer Blackwood said during her statement, small department, often only one officer on duty. So when an officer leaves the physical jurisdiction, it's a big deal. So in that regard, the chief's investigation sets forth his belief that her conduct that day violated policy for numerous reasons, leaving, not reading Miranda, taking custody of a suspect from another individual. We're now hearing today that Officer Blackwood agrees that she didn't have her own criminal investigation to do, so then if it's solely for IAE purposes, he was in physical custody of a law enforcement officer. So at that point, any concern about his personal safety stopped. By definition, he's safe. The Snapchat, it seems like where Officer Blackwood and her counselor are conceding that it occurred and it was not okay. Facebook engagement, similar thing. I understand that there's some dispute about the control of the account. I think that's a bit of a red herring. The issue is we need to be mindful of when we're engaging with the public, and we can't be shutting down commenting and things like that. But I want to sort of put a wall right there, because Officer Blackwood's counsel is right. It's the chief's position that any one of these incidents is enough. And he can speak to this, but to answer the question as to why now, he did refer it to the PIE. They did investigate it. He was told that just sit tight, don't compromise our investigation. He was specifically told not to interview her. That was the first link in the chain. These other incidents occurred while that sort of was in place. And so in his discretion as the supervising officer of the department, he decided to just hold until we received word back from the AG's office, and then he would proceed with all the investigations. Certainly, again, if they need more time to prepare, Officer Blackwood was not harmed in any way by any delay. In fact, she was permitted to continue to work and earn a living. There is nothing in RSA 4148 that says that the fireable conduct needs to be limited to conduct that is so severe that it requires immediately placing someone on leave, right? Police departments are permitted to terminate police officers through the Board of Selectmen if they have cause. And that's a pretty broad standard, which includes violating policies. And not all policy violations are so severe that you would immediately bench an officer, especially when you're a small department, confiscate the badge and say, you know, we're going to pay you to stay home until we sort this out. But if we put a wall there, you know, look at these drug incidents, and that to me is the big problem. I think the chief can speak to this. It seems like Officer Blackwood concedes that she left marijuana, which is a Schedule I drug, under federal drug law, on her desk unsecured. Yes, it was in an evidence bag. According to her statement today, she was told not to do that by the chief, and then she returned that marijuana to an evidence locker. And then according to her statement today, she then did it again with another drug. So there, if we're gonna talk about progressive discipline, it's right there. I mean, according to her statement today, she was told about a drug thing and then just mere weeks later did it again. That to me is the most alarming thing I've seen in this packet. The notion that a sworn officer would both fail to secure contraband and fail to secure, especially in the second case, potentially dangerous contraband. I'm not sure, and I don't think that the chief has determined what the powdery substance was in that second bag. Could be cocaine, could have been heroin, could have been fentanyl. We don't know. All that matters is that it was seized during some sort of interaction with a civilian and left out in the open on the desk. As the select board may be aware, the police department, while secure, does have public visitors from time to time, and I believe the chief has even conducted tours with students and things like that as part of sort of the community outreach program. The idea that if this was such a big deal, Officer Blackwood would have been removed from her evidence control role is a bit of a red herring. That's a different role. That's managing basically the intake of the evidence that other people put there, the control of the actual evidence run. Other than the Snapchat incident, there was nothing at this time that gave him concern about that. The issue was that the bag didn't even get to there, didn't even get to that point. It's the chief's position that these drug incidents occurred strictly in her capacity as a patrol officer. And I think he would describe it, and I think this phrase is apt, it's Officer 101. I mean, this is basic stuff that you would expect an officer out of the academy to understand. It shouldn't require warnings, it shouldn't require teaching. It's, you know, you take drugs off the suspect, you keep it secure. And the idea that receiving an emergency call is sufficient to excuse that behavior is a bit confusing, especially with a small department, when my understanding is the evidence control room, which of course Officer Blackwood does have access to, and the temporary box are mere feet away from her desk. And I believe the chief would say she would probably need to actually walk by it to get to her desk. To me, again, I don't take the position, or I take the position that the board doesn't need to go through and identify each basis and overturn or exonerate or anything like that. I certainly don't think the board can issue some sort of alternative discipline. This issues before the board to determine whether or not the board wants to terminate Officer Blackwood's employment. It's my position that the drug incidents alone are sufficient. And again, when it comes to RSA 4148, while cause is required, it does not need to be such an egregious act that the officer would be decertified, right? No one is saying that Officer Blackwood is completely unqualified to serve as an officer or that her credentials should be revoked, right? There may be standard reporting processes the chief needs to follow whenever there's any sort of investigation, but that doesn't mean, just because it doesn't rise to that level, it doesn't mean that the town can be forced to keep her on. Right, the town, as an employer, is required to give her some process and to only terminate her for cause. And it's our position that that's established just by the investigation reports. Chief kind of took over. Do you have anything you want to add? I know you prepared a statement, or do you want to?
Actually, I don't have anything to add, but if you want to hear my opening statement, that's fine.
I don't think it's necessary.
I don't have anything at this time.
He's obviously able to answer any questions if there's follow-up questions about any of the investigation.
The board have any questions from the chief? No? No questions for you, chief. Are you finished?
Yep.
Okay, so it goes back to you. You do a final
Thank you. Just real quick.
Sure.
Opposing counsel is correct in a sense that you are the hiring and firing authority for the town. But the courts would also agree that this is part of a due process for her. As the hiring and firing authority of the town, you also have the authority to overturn findings, which is part of her appellate rights. Otherwise, what are we doing here today other than, maybe not firing her, or firing her, but, the academy is going to wonder, what are these findings? Are they sustained, they're not sustained? I disagree with opposing counsel. I believe the selectmen do have the authority to change findings because you are the police chief's employer and supervisor. We don't need any further time to prepare. We obviously prepared our statements and prepared our arguments here, which you've heard. I would just point out that the town policy under your handbook does have a just cause. I believe it does say just cause in there for termination. Miranda is, again, you've heard that. I do think the Farmington incident was a red herring. I think that was maybe one thing that caused some concern, but I don't think that was the big one. I agree with the council. In my opinion, I see the two leaving the drugs on the desk as more of an issue. Again, I don't see it as an issue that should be terminated for, but the Farmington one's a red herring to be looking at. As in regards to what he's talking about with Miranda, she found out about the bump on the head when she was talking to him on the phone prior to him being in custody. So again, there was no custody. There was custody at one point, but there was no interrogation as part of that custody. And when you do have somebody in custody, the courts allow for certain questions to be asked, such as booking-related questions. Are you injured? Is a booking-related question. But not how did you get injured? Are you injured? Do you have any injuries on you? Is an appropriate question. Your name, your address, things of those nature are all appropriate questions that are allowed without Miranda when a person is in custody. Also the police department too, even with looking at these, leaving the drugs out on the desk, they weren't left out unsecured in a sense. They were secured in an evidence bag, so it's a tamper-proof bag that couldn't be messed around with. Two, it's in a locked police station where the public doesn't have access to, only authorized personnel have access to. Yeah, if a public person does come in, they're usually escorted. So to say it's like she left it out at the McDonald's counter or something like that is completely different than leaving it on her desk in a secured police department with other vetted police officers that maybe walking around have access to it. Not ideal. I wouldn't recommend it. But I don't see it as something that's a terminable offense. And in the first offense of that too, there were no temporary evidence lockers available at that time because it was in the move with the station and those lockers weren't set up yet. So I just want to bring that attention to you as well too. And I think that's it. With that, again, I would just ask that the board not terminate Officer Blackwood. Primarily for the reasons of she hasn't had an evaluation in 2 years. She wasn't disciplined along the way. And as for the AG's, the opposing counsel says she wasn't spoken to because the AG's office told her not to. Well, yeah, the AG's office investigated the Farmington incident, didn't even interview Officer Blackwood because they realized it wasn't an issue almost immediately. So she was never even interviewed by the AG's office. Didn't have any idea what was going on. And just because they said don't speak to her until we're done our investigation, that doesn't mean that he couldn't have spoken to her for the Snapchat photo, for the Facebook, turning off the comments on Facebook, or for the two evidence issues. He just chose not to, up until he was ready to terminate her in April, at the end of April. So for all these reasons, I just think at this point it's fundamentally unfair to terminate her employment with this town, which, she served 4 years. She's enjoyed her time here in Ossipee. And with that, I just want to thank you.
Thank you.
Just one brief
Sure,
point of
go ahead.
clarification. The AG's report, which is part of the packet, The AG's role in investigating in that context was determine whether or not there was reasonable suspicion to believe there was probable cause that Officer Blackwood committed a crime. So that's what the Public Integrity Unit is designed to do, is designed to oversee public officials to make sure that if there's any potential criminal wrongdoing, it's addressed through the AG. So all that report intended to do, and all it ends up doing, is making a determination about that. So the finding is that there was no reasonable suspicion that further investigation would lead to probable cause. It specifically says in there that it be referred back to Chief Babin and to the Conduct Review Committee of the Police Standards and Training for any potential administrative review. So the AGs aren't looking at the policies, they're not looking at internal department directives and stuff like that. They're strictly looking at potential criminal statutes. But other than that, I don't have anything further. No.
I'm going to give you an answer if you want to.
No, and I was just gonna say, he's correct with that. They're only interested in criminal matters, and they looked at this and said there was no criminal issue here whatsoever. And then he's right, they referred back to the department to review policies. But thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. So I'm going to close the hearing, and I'm going to make a motion to go into non-public under RSA 91A32A. Do I have a second? Roll call, Brian?
Yes.
Kyle? And Smith is yes. We're going into non-public.
10:20.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
are you going to be rendering a decision today? Do you want us to stay, or do you want us to, Okay, I mean, we don't need it. Take your time. Like I said, I provided you with a document with all the arguments to read over, so.
It's up to you. We will be coming back down, going back into the public meeting, and then recessing.
Okay,
Maybe within an hour, but maybe not. I'm not sure.
okay, thank you, sir. In my car.
That's all right. 11:14.
They're coming.
I make a motion to re-enter the public meeting. All those in favor? Aye. So the board had deliberated for an hour. It was an extremely difficult and complex discussion. The decision was not easy. But the board did vote unanimously to terminate Officer Blackwood effective immediately. Thank you. I make a motion to adjourn. Second. All those in favor? Aye.
11:14.
Thank you.
I think I might have asked a question.